When good projects go bad, the Mission Impossible 318. People have been asking me about this thing for over a year now because it's been over a year since that whole endeavor got started. And before I say anything else, before I go into anything else, I gotta make this perfectly clear. Andy Wood, Unity Motorsports Garage, I consider him to be a good, valuable friend. Not only is he brilliant, when I have a problem, when I'm stumped with a carburetor issue, he's the guy I reach out to. Not only is he brilliant, but he's also a quality human. Andy Woods is an awesome person. And we will do stuff together in the future. There is no question about it. So I need to get that out of the way, first and foremost. But the 318, the Mission Impossible 318. All right. You have to understand the importance of intent. Do you know what intent is? Intent is, okay, you kill somebody. Now, did you kill somebody by accident? You know, you accidentally backed over them, okay? No intent, right, to hurt or kill or anything like that? Or did you deliberately go out and kill this person because you want to end this person, right? That's the difference between, they're both homicide, but that's the difference between manslaughter, oops, you made a mistake, and murder. That's it, prison for life, okay? So intent is important. And the intent of the Mission Impossible 318 build is what got murdered along the way. And this is why I backed away. And I didn't want to address it in a video until Andy had explained his side of it. So that's why I want to do this now. Andy put out a video last night laying out his perspective on the Mission Impossible 318 build. So I said, okay, now that Andy's done that, I can do this. So, intent. The original intent of the Mission Impossible 318 was not to build a maximum output 318. It wasn't to see what could be done with aftermarket parts or nothing like that. That was not the intent. The intent of the 318 build, Mission Impossible, was to take a completely stock motor, a low performance, undesirable engine that was common everywhere. Anybody could get their hands on one of these things. To take this completely stock motor and only working with the parts that it was born with, okay? This is very important. Only working with the parts that it was born with, modify them, work with them, craft them, do whatever has to be done to make maximum power from that combination. So I chose the 318 because I happen to have several 318s. I've been doing a lot of 318 stuff on this channel. And he says, well, since I've got this and we know what it is, let's see what we could do with this 318. Now this is before Andy and David Vizard, anybody got involved. This is something I was gonna do on my own. Take a completely stock engine, tear it down, and modify the parts, the stock parts that it came with, put it back together again, and see what it'll do on the dyno, with the goal of hopefully making 1 horsepower per cubic inch, which I know is a pipe dream because you're talking about making 90 horsepower over the stock. Well, so the 318 that we chose for this was a 230 horsepower rated engine, 230 horsepower at the flywheel. So to make 318 cubic inches out of that using the stock 2-barrel, the stock cam, the stock, all of this stuff, right, is crazy. It's pie in the sky. But just coming close and using that as the goal. So that's the benchmark. We're going to try to make 1 horsepower per cubic inch out of the stock engine, out of the stock low performance engine. Very important, okay? That was the goal. That was the intent, and that was the goal. I explained this concept to David and Andy on a live, and David wanted to get involved. And I was like, great. This is, because, David is legendary. He's been around forever. He wrote the books, okay? So to have somebody like him involved in this project is like, wow, let's do this thing. So we laid out the groundwork, and we were going to build this engine stock parts, and I said specifically, you can't use anything on this engine that isn't available through Rock Auto, right? So in other words, this would be like no high performance parts, just the stuff it was born with. And we'll work the valves, we'll port it. We can offset grind the crank and mill the deck to get, you know, the compression ratio up, mill the heads, all of the tricks. Right? Anything we can do to streamline the bottom end, anything that we can do to make power from the basic combination, and we'll stick it on a dyno and see what it gets, and hopefully we can get to that 318 horsepower, 318 cubic inch stock engine. That was the goal, that was the intent, and that's how it was laid out, and that's how everybody agreed to it. So I rounded up all of the parts from this engine. So this would be a 1971 or 1972, I forgot what year it was, 318 two-barrel. And I ran them out to David's place. And they were going to start working on the carburetor, because the carburetor is like the real choke point on this. It's a 285 CFM BBD carburetor. It's junk, right? So in order to make that power, we've got to flow a lot more air through this thing than that carburetor was originally intended to. So that was the first thing that we're going to work on. I'm like, great, you know, you got the flow bench, you got all of the skills and know-how. I'll sit back and wait for you to give me further, you know, further direction. What do you need me to do? So basically I left this in David's hands to be like the driver of this project, and I'm going to assist however it has to be assisted. So now, intent, we have to go back to this intent thing. I intended to work with David and Andy. Specifically, I wanted to work directly with Andy on this project. Because like I said, we're friends. I respect Andy. I have a huge amount of respect for Andy. And part of the incentive for me was to work with him and see what we could accomplish with this thing. And of course, you know, David basically leading the charge, because David he's a legend, okay? All right. So they start working on the carburetor, and I did an update on what they had accomplished so far. And then the next thing I know, there's a third party involved, or a fourth party, a fellow named Charles Savidio, who I have no idea who he is. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about Charles Savidio at all. I don't know him. I've never met him. I've never talked to him. I have no idea where he comes from or nothing, right? But I do know that all of a sudden I keep getting tagged in videos. I keep getting tagged in videos. Charles Savidio, Charles, and all right. Now, I see what Charles is doing now is he's reworking a set of heads, closed chamber 302 casting heads, which are like the most desirable 318 heads. And right away, like red flags are going up in my head. I'm like, okay, not only don't I know who Charles Savidio is, and I didn't sign on to this project to work with somebody who I don't know, but these aren't the heads that we're supposed to be using. We're supposed to be using the least desirable head, the one that came with this engine. And all of a sudden now the heads are being changed. And then there's talk of LS valves and all sorts of other things. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is not taking the stock engine and massaging all of the stock parts to get the most power out of it. This is taking an engine and re-engineering it. All right, so now at this point, if you're going to re-engineer the package, if you're going to re-engineer this 318, by changing the heads, by changing the valves, by changing all of these other things, well, you're no longer building the Mission Impossible 318. Now you're just building a modified 318. Well, why not just take a 318, order up a stroker crank and a set of high compression pistons and a set of aftermarket heads? They're all over the place and they're cheap, and a nice 4-barrel intake manifold and a nice carburetor, stick it, you know, all together, which really anybody could do in an afternoon, and go ahead, make 450 horsepower with it. It's like falling out of a tree. There's no challenge to that. And that's not the Mission Impossible 318. There's nothing impossible about that. You're talking about just modifying an engine. So once I saw that there was another party involved who I didn't know, and I'm not saying anything bad about him. I'm not saying anything bad about him at all. So don't misquote, right? Don't misrepresent what I'm saying here. But this is now, there's a third party involved in this, and I'm being told to ship parts to Florida. Ship parts to Florida. Where does this come from? All right. So It went off the rails in several different ways. It lost the intent of the project. It lost the purpose of the project. And now it lost that dynamic of wanting to work directly with Andy and David to build this engine and see what it's going to do. And David was insistent on using a 4-barrel on it, and I agreed at some point. I says, yeah, let's do the Mission Impossible thing with the stock intake manifold, and then just for giggles, let's throw a 4-barrel on it and see what it'll make. I mean, that's as far as that part of it went. But the idea was working with those stock parts. So once I saw that it had strayed from that ideal, okay, from that goal, from that purpose, that intent, I lost interest in it. I didn't lose interest in it. I became very frustrated with it because there was really nothing I could do. I don't think I could have possibly been clear as to what the intent of this project was and what the scope of the project was. But then you've got all different people with different ideas, throwing them in there, and every one of those ideas strayed from the original intent. Intent is super important. And the thing is, everybody has projects that run off the rails, that don't work out the way they're supposed to. The problem is when you do them on YouTube, you've got thousands of people watching. And you've always got the critics. You've always got the people who are like, they're looking for the thing to get you with. The perfect example of that was the Lunar Outlaw 318 build that went to Nick's garage. And there's a perfect example of where intent gets completely muddled. The intent of that build was to see what we could do with the stock parts in one day. One day, it was very important, and this is during the height of the lockdown too. This was actually 4 years ago, like I think this week or next week. So everything was like just locked down. There were no auto parts stores open, there was nothing, okay? So the idea was to take all of these parts that I had never seen before. So Lunar had taken a 318 apart in upstate New York, and he drove it all down here to Tennessee. And in one day, we were supposed to take whatever he brought, slam it together, and send it up to Nick's garage to be put on the dyno. So, and this was all going to be done live. So we did I guess it was like a 14-hour long live. It was in several installments, but it was like 14 hours total live of this build. So it started out with, in the morning, me being introduced to a big pile of parts that I had never seen before. It's like all brand new to me, right? And whatever he brought down, and this was really the hook to the whole deal. Whatever he brought down, we were going to assemble the best that we could. We were going to port the heads and do all this other stuff in one day live, and then we were going to send it up to Nick's to be dynoed. So he brings on these parts, and things were a mess, right? It was bad. It was really bad. But this is the challenge, right? One day we're going to assemble this thing and we're going to send it up. So he brought down parts that were mix matched. In other words, like the bearings didn't match the crank. There was one oversized piston in the bunch. We actually had to field strip another engine to get a piston that would actually fit in the block. All sorts of obstacles to this. And during that whole time, it was live, and Nick was actually watching what was happening. Like on the video, you could see me talking back and forth to Nick, and towards the end of the video, I'm like, Nick, we're sending you off a bomb. And I put one of our stickers on a big grease sweep, and I says, here, make sure you have this in the dyno room. And I even told him, I says, hey, when you push the lever on this thing, make sure you squint, because it's gonna blow up. I know it's gonna blow up. The challenge was to send up whatever he brought down, whatever Lunar brought down. The challenge was to assemble that the best way we could in one day, live, and send it up to Nick's. And whatever it was gonna be, was gonna be. But things ran off the rails. I wouldn't have done anything different. We stuck to the intent of the challenge. And it was bad. I knew it was bad, and we said that it was bad. But then it gets up to Nick's, and suddenly Nick is very surprised at how bad this thing is. So, at any rate, it's been going on for like 4 years now. People are constantly like, what about the engine he sent up to Nick's? Yeah, we all knew it was bad. We knew it was bad when we built it, and we knew it was bad when we sent it up there. We know it was bad. But the intent gets lost. And that's what happened with Mission Impossible 318. The intent got lost. And then once the intent got lost, I'm like, I can't do anything with this. This is, you know, if I want to build a maximum output 318, I'll take a 318 block and I'll get a stroke or crank and I'll get some high compression pistons and I'll get a cam and I'll get some good cylinder heads and I'll get an intake manifold and I'll get a carburetor, a dual assist, and boom, 450, 500 horsepower, no problem. Just like falling out of a tree. That's not the Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible is to take the stock, low performance parts that this engine was born with and modify it and tweak them and grind them and finesse them in such a way that we can make 318 or come close to making 318 horsepower out of this combination. It wasn't, the build wasn't, or I should say the end goal of it, the ultimate, the horsepower really wasn't the thing. The thing was the science. It was massaging each of these parts to see what we can get out of them and quantifying the changes. And does that make any sense? Because he had a flow bench, so we could check each aspect of it as we went along. To see, there's all these tricks. There's 1,000 tricks to make horsepower, right? Grind this, back face that, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's see how these things actually work. Let's see how it all fits together and how we can maximize this package and get the most out of a completely stock 318 made from completely stock parts. How much power can we make out of this, right? I need to keep stressing this because people love to misquote. People love to, it's just human nature, right? I have to keep stressing that. Completely stock. Once you change the cylinder heads, once you change the valves, once you change the rods, once you change anything, any aspect of that, it's no longer that project. And like I said, at that point, when I realized how far away from the intent this thing had gone, that's when I bailed and I backed out. And I haven't said anything like for a year now because I wanted Andy to be able to explain his side of the story. We talk all the time. We talk very often on the phone. So this isn't like, oh, it's a surprise. Andy Wood dropped a video and Tony's responding to it. No, we talk back and forth all the time. I was just waiting for him to be ready to tell his side of the story. So now that's why I'm telling my side of the story. Now, and there's the St. Jude's aspect of it. And so, okay, so this is one of the justifications for building it the way they're building it. They're saying that, well, since it's going to be, the engine's going to be auctioned off to raise money for St. Jude's, that they don't want something that's going to blow up. They want something that's going to be able to go to 8,000 RPM. And okay. But that's the justification for building everything out of high quality, top-notch parts. They don't want it to blow up, you know, for the person who wins the thing. Okay, that's fine, but that's not the Mission Impossible build. The Mission Impossible build is, just like the Lunar Outlaw build, it's let's put this thing together and stick it on a dyno, and what it does, it does. So what it doesn't do, it doesn't do. And if it blows up, it blows up. What are you going to do, right? That's the mission. That's the story. Not, oh, this is a great motor you could just put in any car and go really fast with. That wasn't the point. That's not the intent. So basically, I don't want to say the Mission Impossible, I don't want to say the Mission Impossible build was, okay, it's homicide as far as I'm concerned. I lean definitely more towards manslaughter than murder, right? I don't think anybody intended to derail it, but it got derailed, and at that point, I backed out. So here's the summary of this. They're going to go ahead and David, Andy, and Charles are going to go ahead and build this engine, and they're going to dyno it, and they're going to auction it off for St. Jude's, to raise money for St. Jude's. And I wish them all the luck in the world. I hope everything works to the degree that they want it to work, and that the engine is, the project to build is successful, and that whoever gets it is going to be happy with it, and money will be raised for probably one of the best causes you could possibly raise money for. So that's that. But I myself have to back away from it because I can't be involved in a project that I don't see, me personally, that I don't see value in. So there will be a Mission Impossible 318 build coming from me. I will be doing one of these, but I'm not going to even think about it or take any steps towards it until theirs is complete, because I don't want to compete. You know, the idea isn't to compete, and I got to keep stressing this. Andy Wood is a good friend of mine. I have great respect for him. So I don't want to, there's not going to be any competition between us when it comes to, we'll compete on the drag strip. We'll compete all different ways, but we're not going to compete this way. So once they've completed their project, I'll start on mine. And what I'll do is I'll take a stock 318, we'll pop it into bottle rocket, go make a couple of passes, baseline passes, and then we'll take it, tear it all down, and make all of these modifications and changes, stick it back in the same car, go make passes, and then we can quantify. Well, I'll just have to make our calculation. I don't have a dyno, and I don't need to go out and find a dyno. We'll just make our calculations based on mile an hour, weight, mile an hour, and speed, and we can figure out how much power it made or didn't make. So, but again, see, I'm not even gonna think about that until they're finished, until they've put a wrap on their project, then I'll do it. All right, so yeah, I know this was pretty long and rambling, but I really needed to get this out, right? We need to clear the air so that everything is understood and everybody knows where everybody else stands. So Mission Impossible, if you want to follow that project, David's channel, Andy's channel, and Charles Savidio's channel, go over there and follow along. Support them any way they can, because even though I believe that the intent of the project has been derailed, the intent of trying to raise money for a good cause and awareness and everything else for a good cause, well, that intent is there, and that intent has more value than anything we can do with nuts and bolts over here. And I'll wait till they're done, and then I'll do my version of it, and we'll just go from there. All right, so that's it. I'll see you tomorrow.